Uh, I'll ask the secretary to take the roll just to make sure that we have a quorum.
Calling roll call. Chairman Carney,
He's present.
Member Dane Grilli,
I'm here.
Member Adam Freed,
Present.
Member Arlene Shaw, Member GK Sue. We still have a quorum.
I didn't hear you. Say again.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I want to welcome the members, staff, and any guests we may have to what is one of our most important meetings of the year. What we do is ultimately to set the rate, and we will hear in the next few weeks how our constituents feel about what we're proposing. But this is the first meeting that the board has had in order to think about out loud about what that rate will be. Fingers crossed, we'll see where it goes. And we have a quorum. So let's do the minutes.
Member Shaw just arrived, Mr. Chair.
I'm here, I'm sorry.
Oh, all right, terrific. Hey, Maurice, how are you?
It's real this morning. My informality is not disrespectful to like the role, like the title.
But, I mean, you got a long way to go. I mean, that's a long trip for you. I thank you very much for making it. We'll start with the minutes from the March 3rd meeting. I think that's right. You've all had a chance to read those minutes. Are there any questions about those minutes?
A lot of head shaking.
No, there are no questions.
Thank you, Arlene. Then
Chairman.
may I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Yes.
Dan.
Is
Adam.
that Dan?
No,
Yeah.
Dan.
Well, Dan,
Dan
second.
seconded.
And I was agreeing.
So Chairman, I like to, call for everyone to do a vote. So I'm just gonna call each one by their name, if it's okay.
Sure. We'll do what you think is appropriate. What would you like?
Thank you. So, I'll start with Member Dane Gurley. How do you vote?
Approved.
Member Adam Freed, how do you vote?
Approved.
Member Arlene Shaw, how do you vote?
Approved.
And Chairman,
I approve.
how do you vote?
I approve. Okay. All in favor?
Well,
Aye.
everyone approving.
Yep.
Aye. I think we've done this already, but now that we've cleared up who's there. Thank you all very much. Let me say that I truly regret not being with the board. This is one of the two biggest importance of the year, and I'm not there. I apologize for that. I'm going to be better. I'm going to be there for the next meeting. Thank you all very much for giving me a hand. I appreciate it. So the second agenda item is the right route fate for the fiscal year beginning July 1st. And whoever's going to do that, please have at it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am Rohit Agarwal. I'm the Commissioner at the Department of Environmental Protection. I'm joined, of course, by Marissa Morey, our Executive Director of the Water Board, as well as the Chief Financial Officer of the agency. I believe at some point our colleague Albert Kramer, the Deputy Commissioner for Customer Service, will also help present what we have today. So what I'm going to do is give you an overall update on the agency. I will introduce our rate proposal, and then I'll turn it over to our CFO to go through the details of the rate proposal and some of the financial aspects, as well as a couple of concepts and updates on customer affordability and what we have been doing on collections, which is actually, both of those are in fact quite central to our overall proposal as well. So look, as you all know, our main mission at DEP, our most important one, is delivering clean drinking water reliably to all of New York City and to 1.5 million people north of the Bronx. And in 2024, as usual, we did that very, very well. I was pleased just last week, we got some attention to one of our underappreciated pieces of infrastructure, which is our several hundred water sampling stations that got some attention. And as usual, our water is high quality and everything is within the correct tolerances. Next. As you know, we started this past year in earnest our lead service line replacement program that was initially funded on a small scale with some state grants. And this year we kicked off the spending of a much larger amount of money. It was federal funding. So this is a combination of $48 million in grants, largely from the federal government, augmented by some loans that were turned into grants by the state. And as part of this, or in conjunction with this effort, which is targeted as per the rules of the state grant, in a couple of locations that are very low income with very high concentrations of lead service lines. So we started with 2 neighborhoods in the Bronx. We will be expanding later this year to 2 neighborhoods in Queens. Under the terms of this grant, there's the only parts of the city that we can use these under, or use these in. But in addition to this free replacement service, we have been working in compliance with the revised lead and copper rule that the EPA put out last year, and did the first annual mandatory notification, direct mailing or email, depending on what we had available, to 250,000 customers around the city. Roughly half of those or a little less than half, are known to be lead service lines. The rest are unclear. We cannot be sure based on the records whether they are lead or not, so we have to treat them at the moment as if they are not lead. However, our estimate is that there's a total of roughly 150,000. What we have seen as we have gone through to do closer inspection is that roughly only about 15 or 20% of the unknowns turn out to be lead. And so based on that trajectory, our current estimate is that it's about 150,000 service lines. One thing I will highlight, last year we testified in support of a bill at the City Council that, among other things, would have adopted the legislative precedent that was set in Newark, which would make it mandatory for a homeowner, if they have been offered a free replacement and turned it down, to replace it on their own. We do not have that requirement here in New York City, and one of the things we have found is that our uptake of this free service is, I think, in the 60 to 70% range, which on the one hand is good. On the other hand, it means we are leaving money on the table, and we are leaving an unused benefit that is just bad for the health of New Yorkers. I've been back to the City Council recently to ask them to act on this bill. And unfortunately, I will just say that I think some of the environmental advocates who don't want to have any lead service line legislation until there is a complete, fully funded replacement program citywide, I think are actually actively hurting New Yorkers right now, because they have thus far been unwilling to take this partial step first.
Wait, can you explain? I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt and make this longer. What's the rationale, or if anyone knows, what's the rationale behind blocking it?
So last year, several of the environmental organizations testified that the city had to do a fully publicly paid for program, centrally administered, and that until we had such a program on the table, they would oppose legislation.
But isn't the service lines being replaced for free now?
It is, but only in a couple of neighborhoods. Only in a couple of neighborhoods.
Got it.
They argued they want it citywide before they will move. And
why discourage? Because isn't the legislation based on? I'm sorry.
No. Hey, Arlene, you're totally right. This is my frustration, right? This is my frustration that this is.
Isn't the legislation based on you being offered to do it for free?
Well, it is, but again, we are currently only able to do it in those places where there is federal.
No, I understand what you're saying, but is the legislation would not be enforced on those people to whom a free offer was not made?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Well, there was, by the way, in that bill, there was a longer term mandate.
Okay.
But where I have been particularly frustrated is thus far there has been an unwillingness to think about the different components that could move separately. For example, another component of that bill was requiring the replacement of lead service lines at the time of sale. Right? Something like 0.5% of homes are sold every year. At the time when people are taking out a loan, they're often doing renovations anyway. Like they're not as wedded. One of the key issues is that a lead service line replacement often requires some construction in a front yard. And frankly, people are like, I don't want my plants or whatever to get disturbed, right? When you have a new owner, they're not as tied to that. But again, there are some common sense things that, at least at the moment, we do not have agreement on how to do the complete changeover, but we could be doing a lot more on this than we currently are.
And just one final question on or one before the final question on this. The having a lead surface line doesn't necessarily mean you have lead in the water or present.
Correct. And
what is the translation of testing? Are we seeing percentage of homes that would
it's a very good point and a good question, and something I should have raised. One of the interesting things is we sent out all of these notices. As you would imagine, the requests for our lead test kits, which any New Yorker can request for free by calling 311, went through the roof by a factor of more than 10 for a couple of months. And we have a great data set now on all the testing that was done. And in fact, less than half of them had any lead at all. So even people who had a lead service line, less than half of those houses had any lead whatsoever. And I believe it was less than 10% had anything above the federal action limit. Now, we accept the EPA's determination that any lead is unsafe. But nonetheless, that data should be reassuring to New Yorkers. And once again, one of the reasons behind it is that we work very hard. We add these food-grade orthophosphates that create the coating on the inside of the pipes so that the lead does not leach. And it's something that DEP has been able to manage very well, in contrast to some other water systems where you have had lead issues in a way, in a very concrete way. It has to do with the combination of the water chemistry and the infrastructure. There have been serious lead issues in systems that, for reasons of where their treatment steps take place, they are unable to add the orthophosphates. Happily, we are able to do that very successfully.
One just tiny question: is $48 million secure from the federal government, like in-house? And
this is the money that we have. We were hoping for another.
We ain't getting no more.
Which we're not.
Right now, it's not been canceled, or we haven't heard anything negative. But obviously, it's a dynamic environment. Should we put it that way?
But interestingly enough, Dan, to your building on your question, the current Congress did not act on a congressional review action to rescind the lead and copper rule. So the lead and copper rule that was proposed by was put out by the Biden administration. The opportunity to do a CRA on it has lapsed, and so now it is fixed. And even though one was introduced, apparently the current leadership of the House decided they weren't going to try to undermine it. So,
thanks.
Next. I'm really proud of the work that DEP and particularly our colleagues at the Bureau of Engineering, Design, and Construction did in Gowanus in Brooklyn. As you know, for many years, we've been working on these two massive tanks as part of the Superfund project. One of them at the upper end of the canal, what we call the Red Hook tank. As you see there, requires a massively deep excavation, which you can see on the right-hand side. Last year, there were some concerns about air quality related to our construction work. Some people were advocating that we slow it down, spend what we thought was going to be between $50 and $100 million to build a tent over it, and that would have taken the construction from what at the time was going to be 12 months to something like 30 months. Our engineers actually came up with a solution with our contractor instead to do it faster. And so by working double shifts, our contractor was actually able to complete this excavation in less than 6 months and got it done during the winter when, of course, odor doesn't travel as much. We completed this work. There was not a single odor complaint that was actually traced back to our site. And so this is now done, and this project is ahead of schedule. Again, thanks to the creativity of our engineers. So I'm really proud of this work.
It's a really cool job. Like, as a kid who went to Brooklyn Tech and come to my friends and engineers from Monkey City, like, this is probably one of the coolest things I've ever worked for.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know who spoke, but whoever it was, would you speak up?
Oh, no, I said that, all I said was I went to Brooklyn Tech, so a ton of my friends are engineers around the city, and I just, working for DEP is just like a cool job for an engineer, because there's just so many interesting things that they get to do. Like, this is just fascinating and interesting.
Yep. We have great toys.
Yeah, we do.
All right, next.
That's a great comment. Thank you. It's good to know that people are looking at it from I can improve what I do for a living by doing.
I'm kind of a nerd though, so I don't know if that translates to like the general population.
We have continued our work, and this of course had come out, and I've already spoken to you about the stormwater analysis that we released in the first half of 2024. But we've continued a lot of work, a little bit of which has been behind the scenes on the engineering related to stormwater resilience. As you all know full well, we've actually, this weekend being somewhat of an exception, we've had still a pretty dry year since last August. Even after the drought, it's been relatively dry, so stormwater and flooding have a little bit receded from public attention, but not from ours. And so a good bit of this work has been proceeding, and that's actually one of the highlights, one of the biggest first pieces of news to come out. Next, please. Of our stormwater resilience planning was the announcement that we made earlier this year of a massive investment, $390 million in Bushwick and Brooklyn, to address a location that number one, I will point out, already the neighborhood of Bushwick has a lot of green infrastructure. So we have already kind of pulled that lever, both in terms of rain gardens and a couple of playgrounds that have, school playgrounds that have infiltration basins underneath. But this area, it represents the convergence of 3 major sewers. We've seen a lot of development and, of course, unfortunately, a lot of the phenomenon of people paving over front yards and backyards in that upstream area. And so the flows through this neighborhood have just gone up dramatically. And what you see here is that our engineers determined that it was appropriate to do a 9x increase in sewer capacity down Knickerbocker Avenue. To address the flooding as well as the increased intensity in rainstorms. So this is a big deal. This was a big win for us and represented something that DEP contributed through its work to the effort around getting the City of Yes rezoning package passed.
And is that picture that they're standing next to, is that the before and after what the sewer system looks like? Where you?
Yeah. The left is I think it's 172 inch. So it's not a small sewer, right? But at some parts of Knickerbocker, it will be 3 side-by-side box sewers.
Wow.
Right. And basically curb to curb, there will just be, it's all sewer underneath, right? It's just nuts. But that's what you need.
It's been a great project with DOT as well.
Yes, and work closely with DOT. I'm realizing this slideshow
These
is
pictures
something like,
are so
like-
great.
we need,
It looks at the rich
we need, I know,
Yeah.
sorry about this.
I was noticing
We
too.
should all get.
I was so focused on the headlines, I did not look at the photos. I'm a little embarrassed now.
No, I love
It's
them.
like what
feel
I did
we
last
should all
summer,
put them in like a
but,
side-by-side photo frame.
And I appreciate the student eye at everyone.
Yeah, I like the smile
Yeah.
too. It's like the smile is the best part.
Anyway, we are in the midst of our first truly full-scale deployment of porous pavement. So we've actually moved out of kind of testing and piloting, and so this is something that we also did announce last fall, and construction has continued in a significant way. I will point out, and of relevance to certainly to us at the agency and to you all on the Water Board, we can't lose sight of the fact that porous pavement has really significant maintenance requirements, right? And it is a real risk for us collectively that if between us and DOT and sanitation and OMB, because this will require funding, if we do not have the equipment and staff and the discipline to make sure that this pavement is maintained, it has to be vacuumed every 6 months, this will be a completely wasted investment, right? And so this is something that we as an agency will need to make sure that we are highly disciplined about.
Sorry, pardon my ignorance. Explain.
So the cool innovation of porous pavement is that rather than having all the pieces of gravel in the asphalt glued together in a solid mass, it's glued together in a way that has pores, right? So the water can go down through. Now, we all know what New York City streets are like. There's a lot of grit. That grit will clog up those pores. And so you need a special, basically like a vacuum cleaner, right, to come through and clear out those pores so the water can continue to infiltrate.
Got it. So where are we putting this? Because clearly their streets are taken out of this map. So where are we putting this to make sure that like you're maintaining? Because clearly you're not putting it on streets where like homeowners have to maintain. So like where?
Well, this is in the road. It's not on the sidewalk.
Got it.
So
Okay.
So what this is,
That's what I got.
that may be a bike lane, although
Got
it's
it.
the wrong color for a bike lane. But the point is, we don't put it across the whole crown,
Got it.
because the road is designed so that the water goes down towards the
Yep.
curb. So you only put a small strip next to the curb,
Got it. Okay.
right? And that's what's shown there in the lighter color.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense.
And I assume that these strategies are complementary, where you're doing a green stormwater infrastructure installation and porous pavement and expanding source system, rather than saying porous pavement over here and GSI over there.
Well, yes, and I may have talked about this last year. One of the biggest changes we did in 2022 and 2023 is actually very much changed the way we think about green infrastructure and gray infrastructure. Frankly, previously, we would decide in advance and then do the engineering separately. And it was two separate teams. BWSO's engineering team did gray infrastructure planning, and BEPA's team did green infrastructure planning. Starting really in 2023 in earnest, we've now integrated those teams. They're still split between BWSO and
That
BEPA,
makes sense.
but they work in an integrated way. That's that stormwater strategy we released the first update on last spring. The kind of two hidden innovations behind it. One is the all pipes model, where we now have what is essentially a digital twin of the sewer system, which we had never had before. The other is that we now have this practice where we prioritize the locations around the city that are most likely to flood with the future storm of 2.16 inches per hour rather than our current storm of 1.85 inches per hour. Right? And based on the amount of flooding and a couple of other factors, the team has prioritized those locations, and they are working through an engineering solution that looks at not, let's decide to do gray infrastructure and figure out how to do gray infrastructure. They look at what all of the options might be. They take into account effectiveness, cost effectiveness, and speed of delivery. because that's actually really important. Some things you can do very fast, some things, that Knickerbocker Avenue project, it will be 10 years before it is fully in operation because that magnitude of street reconstruction doesn't happen very quickly, right? Even though we've been working on the engineering for 2 years already, there's still design work, let alone construction work that has to take place. And so now we have this integrated approach. And so, yes, we do that in a very intentional way. The other thing that happens is that DOT, like every other city agency, is subject to the Unified Stormwater Rule. And so a lot of what is going to be happening on porous pavement is the way that DOT will basically contribute to its compliance of the Unified Stormwater Rule.
Can I ask a question that I'm being irritating today? I'm sorry. I just have a lot of questions. So what are we doing internally within the agency to capture this sort of change on how we're structuring the team to make sure that when, you're not here or the next person isn't here, we don't end up back siloed? Like, was it part of the McKinsey study we did? Like, how did we get to sort of this integration? And now that we found that it works really well, how are we making sure that on a go-forward basis it stays in place?
Look, I think this is the kind of thing that you can't really legislate. I think to a certain extent, it's just the fact that these two teams now will have embraced this approach for several years.
Okay.
And, if there is different leadership next year, it's probably a good set of questions for you to be asking about.
Well, so I work at a smaller company. My only thought behind it is sometimes we don't memorialize why we make the decisions. So in 10, 15 years, when someone's looking back at it, they're not thinking about why it was happened. So just asking if there's because there is this turnover that happens and we know it's going to happen, if we're memorializing the whys, that's all.
I would actually put it kind of in the opposite point of view. I think people are asking more like, why did we not do this before? And it makes so much sense that I can't imagine them imagining going back to the other way. Well, because from an engineering point of view, it makes sense, right? Like using all the tools you have in the toolbox for like an integrated solution makes so much more sense to people.
So I just to give you background, I was here when we started green infrastructure. Right? Like that was maybe 4 or 5 commissioners ago.
Yeah.
And the methodology was like, we're going to stick as much green infrastructure into the ground. People hated it. Sometimes you see the swell basins, they're full of garbage. The curb cut is weird. Like, so I hear what you're saying. I just think it's great to memorialize the why or to show the KPIs just so that people remember why. Because I was here when green infrastructure.
Arlene, look, I say that
it was like, we're going to do green roofs, and we're going to do all these things, right? Green roofs ruin, it gets rid of your roof warranty. I learned that at my building, right? So they're just, the why sometimes is important, and memorializing the KPIs can be important so that people just remember what it was. But that's all.
I think one of the challenges here is that because it's an internal planning and design process, it's actually really hard to put it into KPIs. Mm-hmm. It's one of the reasons that stormwater update was so important to get out. Because just frankly, from a cultural point of view, engineers never want to give an update until the design is done.
Correct.
And so it was something of an unnatural act to issue that. We are actually working with the city council right now, and I may be aging this month on legislation that will memorialize stormwater planning and will require the agency to do updates on our progress towards stormwater resilience. And I think that is one of the key things, so that it is not just about project by project, but it is the overall effort towards how we're going to get to citywide stormwater resilience.
I'd say that the digital twin and the use of the full palette of strategies in the case-by-case basis is much more what we see in Europe than in the U.S. A very akin to the Amsterdam model, which I think this helped put New York in the global leadership role, being much more creative and proactive.
Yeah, because it wasn't that. It was like, let's take as much green infrastructure, even if it did make sense, right? Like, I've been here that long, so I'm not. So
well, and
maybe it's just celebrating the wins, right? And maybe it's highlighting the wins, and maybe it's highlighting how the team works. But it didn't look like this before.
The other thing though that you're pointing out, Arlene, that's worth highlighting is the extent to which some of that in the past, I think, was driven by the fact that our green infrastructure program was primarily about the long-term control plan.
Yeah.
Right? And we've had two things happen. One, as you know, 2 years ago, we amended the LTCP with the state to basically give us, we made the commitment we were going to increase our spending on green infrastructure citywide. And they basically said, you know what, we're going to give you credit towards your LTCP for green infrastructure anywhere in the city. We're going to make a bet that green infrastructure is good for CSOs and release some of the one-for-one connection, which is why right now, of course, we do not have citywide green infrastructure, right? Because it's only in those parts of the city where it was demonstrated to have a meaningful, modelable impact on CSOs.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that agreement has begun to unleash our thinking so that it's more, frankly, focused on actual impact than on compliance with this regulatory mandate. The other thing I think we've done a really good job of, and is only going to have to be more important, is working with the state and with local officials and environmentalists in many cases to interpret the LTCP more broadly. I have been pointing out to anyone who will listen that there's a disconnect. We are under an obligation right now to spend, what's the LTCP, $10 billion, right? So roughly a third of our entire capital plan is mandated expenditure related to CSOs. Now, as important as CSOs are, we have made so much progress on cleaning the harbor.
Mm-hmm.
I have, as I have said, I have never had a member of the public who is not affiliated with an environmental organization talk to me about harbor quality as being an urgent issue, because most New Yorkers think we've won that fight.
Yeah.
There's still a ways to go. Every elected official is talking to me about flooding.
Mm-hmm.
Ironically, though, the LTCP has nothing to say about flooding, right? And so one of the things we've done, we did a great thing that I shared with you earlier at the end of last year. Again, a big innovation in engineering where our engineers looked at a mandated multi-billion-dollar project for Newtown Creek and said, you know what, this is highly suboptimal.
Yep.
We redesigned it. We got the support of local elected officials and the environmental community to get the design modified and approved by DEC. They did so at the end of December. That's the good news. This is now one of the highlights of our new capital plan, $3 billion. But it is finally, I think, a cost-effective design. We're in the early stages of doing something similar with the Flushing Tunnel, which is probably going to be as big. And if we design it well, which is going to require the support of the regulators, we may be able to use that same project for a small incremental cost to alleviate a lot of the flooding in northern Queens, right? The issue there is we need both the regulators and the environmentalists and everybody at the city, both within the agency and at OMB and others, to be thoughtful about the broad set of things we're actually trying to accomplish. I do worry that if we were in a situation in which, for example, the city and the state were not working together the way we happily have been over the last several years, that could go away, right? But that is going to be one of the key things we need. So anyway, I will stop, but that's several relevant things that your question raises. Next. We, as you all know, a year and a half ago, we put the biogas system at Newtown Creek into service. It had a bit of a rocky first 6 or 9 months and got some negative press. The reality is it's been doing pretty well. There were some issues this winter. Cold weather affects this system, and this is something we saw, and of course this past winter was one of the colder we've had in the last several years. And so that led to some of the issues back in January. But in general, I think this is actually now a system that's been pretty successful in terms of its reliability. One of our big and in an agency of 5,800 people to highlight 5 new hires seems a little out of proportion, but we have moved towards the creation of borough commissioners, and finally, last October, I think it was, we got our full set hired. These 5 people, 2 of whom, of course, are well-known alumni of DEP, Mario and Effie. Alfonso, Marty, and Drasana are new to the agency, but to have this kind of zone defense where we have fairly senior people whose job it is to be that first line of relationship with electeds and particularly community boards across the boroughs, I think has already proven itself to be pretty transformative. Next, one of Albert's key tasks right now is and we've reported on this, is the replacement of all of our automatic meter reading devices, right, which started in earnest just recently. As you see, the numbers, of course, are pretty daunting. We have 600,000 devices that we will need to swap out. These are now 10 years old. We have seen the batteries fail. It is in our KPIs and the mayor's management report that we have seen our estimated reads go up as a result of this. And this is why it is so important to get this underway, and we have a robust budget for it right now, and a massive effort underway with both contractors and our own staff.
Question for you. Where are we with like the larger meters? I know that we had like that was a set aside plan. Did we ever figure out what happened with like the ones that you were creatively thinking about how to get automated, like JFK and some of like the larger meter readers? I mean, you don't have to talk about it today. We should just get it.
We've made a lot of progress. In many cases, those weren't about AMR.
Oh, yeah, it was just about the scale.
Yes, but actually, I'm pleased, and Albert can say more on this if he wishes, or Narissa. But we've been working very intensely, particularly with the MTA and the Port Authority. And while we're not completely done with those, I think with both entities, we're actually on a really good path towards resolution.
Yeah, I mean, you just, like, in one of the meetings, because for a long time, we talked about the conversion. I've been for a long time. We talked about the conversion to wireless meter readers. That's how long I've been here. And that was like the big challenge for the agency. So just would love to hear, because it's cool and you guys do great work, just to understand what we did with the larger meters.
I'm happy to give it more comprehensive.
Yeah. Sorry, guys.
Well, and actually, one of the things that Albert's been doing is setting up a large customer team, right, within BCS, to give those very large customers the attention that that they need, both because of the size of their operations, but also, frankly, because of how important they are to our revenue.
And truthfully, sort of my understanding, because again, I've been here a long time, was that like the inefficiency of those meters really was for some of these larger facilities. The reason why I'm asking and why I think it's important is because it really leads to like capture of revenue, right?
Yep.
And as we think about, which is what we came here to talk about, it's important just to understand sort of how we're making sure that we're capturing the right amount of revenue, because it had shown that the prior meters were not accurately like reflecting true bills, which is what you found when you converted. So that's why I'm asking, not to be irritating, but more.
No, it's fine. No, and I think we'll.
Well, no, I was going to say Albert's team has been doing work over the last couple of years to actually get those meters in place, both of those larger entities. And so we're actually really coming to the tail end of that and sort of in discussions with them. And I would also say that they've been acting very much in good faith, because they've also been giving their payments to us along the way to show that they have their skin in the game as well as they work through those questions with us.
Yeah, I don't think it's nefarious on anyone's part. And it has always been that we understood that these meters being accurate was important for revenue for the system, especially as we reduce our water usage. So it's been something we talked about often.
Yeah, why don't we plan at one of the next two water board meetings? We'll do a report on large customers in general. That would be fine. But it's some of it is also the hangover from the pandemic.
I'm not in the system. You know what I mean? Like,
Look,
No, we have good stuff to report
as you
on.
know, we have
guys
been,
work hard.
Yeah.
I would imagine it's safe to say that over the last couple of years, DEP has been focused on revenue in a way that it traditionally has not. And a lot of that is thanks to Albert and Narissa. Anyway, next, so another thing that we've been very focused on, of course, is spending all the money that we are allowed to spend. I'm really pleased that once again, we are on track to achieve pretty damn close to 100% commitment of our capital plan. And this is, as you see, and this has been a step change in what the agency is able to do, going from a 10-year average of being able to invest roughly $1.5 billion to now being on our third year where we're effectively at a run rate of $3 billion, which, of course, with a $33 billion 10-year capital plan is exactly where we have to be if we are going to do what we need to do. But this is it is a big deal, the fact that we are able to deliver this, because the throttle on what DEP was able to do over the previous decade was not actually the money, it was actually the throughput. And at least at the moment, we have managed to keep that going. And there are still, I was talking with the first deputy mayor just last week about another opportunity we have working with the law department where we could cut, we think, a month off of procurement cycles, which would be great. And something that we could, I hope, get done over the coming months and make that change with them. So we continue to look for ways to do this even better.
And I think this is the main slide where we have some information about the new additions to the capital plan this year that I know we've talked about a little bit, but we have the $33.3 billion 10-year plan that we have now includes this $3.8 billion of new funding that was approved through the preliminary plan, is still existing in the executive plan. And the highlights you can see there. So the first project is the one that Rit was just talking about in terms of that Newtown Creek LTCP project. That's also sort of doing double, triple duty with its design. So we have, that's now coming to the full construction has come into the capital plan for $3.2 billion. And then we have other work for state of good repair for the wastewater facilities. We've got some resiliency work for pump stations, another cloudburst project for flooding relief, and then some initial funding for the Jamaica neighborhood rezoning that's in planning stages. So that's reflected as we go through sort of the rates and sort of the different costs of the system. This is kind of the big highlight on capital side for this year in terms of the increase in the plan.
I think you all know full well, and we've talked at length about the drought last fall. This is really just to point out that we are undertaking a review of all of our drought protocols. Don't have much content to share on that just yet, but we will later on this year. And then one thing, as you all know, one of the casualties of the drought was that we had to postpone the work on the Delaware Aqueduct. And unfortunately, a number of things converged to make it so that we are not going to be able to restart it this year. While it is possible, I haven't gotten the numbers yet today, that with this weekend's rain, that we will finally reach the target for where the reservoirs ought to be at this point in the season, because we've still, despite the fact the drought ended, we still were well below the annual average. The reality is that our contract with our construction partner envisioned 3 attempts. And as you know, we had to postpone in 2022, and then we had to postpone in 2023, and then we had to postpone in 2024. So we've used up our 3 attempts. And given the fact that this was a construction contract that had been agreed before the pandemic, our construction partner was somewhat uninterested in just extending the current contract. And so we are going to go out to bid. That will give us the opportunity to do a number of other things that will, we believe, further increase the smoothness of when we actually get it done. We've got some pumps that did not function as well as we would have liked, so we're probably going to rebuild those. There was another part of Rondout where a number of homes that we did not expect to lose their water lost their wells, and so rather than servicing them with tanks, we are going to work with the town of Newburgh to extend the water mains so those homes don't lose service. But this is probably going to cost us a couple of years, unfortunately. So we will try to do the procurement as quickly as we can. I think the likelihood of getting it done next year is low, but again, we will do everything we can.
How do you think about the risk in the interim? What does that look like?
I mean, the downside of this is really the continued loss of the 35 million gallons a day. What?
The leaks.
Yeah.
The leaks. Yeah. Sorry. Right. I mean, that's the main cost. You know, this has never been about kind of a near-term worry about catastrophic failure or something like that. This is about kind of the general maintenance that over decades, if we don't address this, it will get worse, and therefore kind of the cleanup we need to do. So this is good hygiene, right? So if we don't get it done,
There's some nice lakes up there for the communities, and they're not very upset about it either. Like developers build lakefront properties and like a leaf hole.
Lakefront properties.
Yeah.
Lakefront, I like that.
They're lakefront, so so it's like it's not like the town is like upset about it either.
but look, I think the sense of urgency that I feel
Yeah,
about
absolutely.
this, in addition to just kind of the good hygiene of getting done kind of maintenance work, is of course that as we saw last year, the likelihood of this kind of drought is only going to get more real, right, or more or higher. And as you know, we can only do this work between October and May, right? And so it's a little like, the kind of things that NASA faces where your launch window is really narrow, and if you miss it one time, right, you go around again.
Concern the interplay of both managing the drought and reservoir levels and the intense rainstorms. So having to arbitrage with a narrow margin, losing 35 million gallons a day, just means you're having less wiggle room.
So, but, I can assure you that nobody wants to get this work done as much as the staff at DEP.
I mean, you've been living with it for so long. It's like you'll feel like you lost a friend.
I don't think that's what people are thinking about it there. Yeah. Anyhow, all right. So moving then to our rate proposal, and I'm about to turn it over to Narissa. The fact is we've had a good year. We've had a really good year in terms of revenues. Thanks to the attention that particularly BCS, but it does involve other parts of the agency as well. In continuing our shutoffs, in continuing the work with major customers, and by the way, some of those have written us in one case a $20 million check or $15 million check, right? So some of those lead big chunks all at once. And the lien sale, which has been a really big driver. We are more than $260 million ahead of revenue plan right now, which gives us a significant cushion versus where we expect it to be. The Water Board and the Water Finance Authority have done, as they often do or always do, really good management of our cash reserves and our financing. And that allows us, we believe, to have a more generous, as you would, rate proposal this year that nonetheless will support a capital program that is up by 10%, $33 billion, up from $29 billion in the January plan, as well as deal with some of our inflation. We have seen significant inflation on chemicals particularly. While we're protected on a lot of our spend, the chemicals do fluctuate, and therefore that's been a driver of some inflation.
Sorry, can I just, I'm really irritating today. Just would love, and doesn't need to be here, but would love to just sort of understand, as someone who issues bonds, who had a tough time last month getting a deal through the pipeline that I'm actually closing tomorrow, and the disaster this morning, would love to understand how the Water Finance Authority, and I'm looking at you, is thinking about bond issuances, because I do think with all of the instability post-Liberation Day, hopefully also liberated, that the bond markets have been in complete and utter chaos. So we just want to understand how the Water Finance Authority is thinking about that, because we actually do have to be forward planning, right? Like, I put a deal in the market at SOFR plus 135. I did that deal at SOFR plus 158, and 2 days later that was SOFR plus 180. And right now, that is now SOFR plus 210, and that's over the span of less than 30 days. So knowing that the majority of our financing is done through bond issuances would love, and it's clear we're higher for longer, and it's clear that the markets are unstable, and with putting out $33 billion, would just love to understand how as an agency we're thinking about managing that increased cost, because, you know, for so long we've been retiring bonds and not going in the other direction. So I think it's just a critical piece as we're talking about, again, the economic outlook for the agency on a go-forward basis. Just would love to understand that strategy. I won't steal it for work, though, I promise.
Well, look, let's come back. Obviously, Dave and Phil are here.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at
Nerissa will go through some of the relevant points, and then we can certainly ask Dave and Phil to say more. But yeah, they've done a really good job that has given us.
It's Al.
So,
May I have a question about planning forward? Where will the present statute start with in the 5 boroughs? Will we start, Mr. Kadamiris, where you started, or do we start here?
We couldn't hear the question.
all right.
Sorry, can you say again, Al? Where will the...
Where will the planning for the 5 boroughs start? Will it start with the Keswick's reflection, or will it start here, the proposed rate increase? Are we going to tell a great deal about and talk great boring about we've had to do things, but what are we going to tell the people who are sitting to hear what and why of the rate increase?
I think, Al, we're having a little bit trouble hearing you, but I think you're asking about perhaps when the public hearings are. So in the next few slides, we'll talk about the rate proposal for this year. So that will be public in today's presentation. And then we have hearings in all 5 boroughs at the end of May, the last week of May, and the first few days of June. Is that helpful for your question?
Let's hear what you're going to do, and I'll let you know.
Okay.
Okay.
Am I making stand now? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
No, you said you couldn't earlier. I'm sorry, I didn't realize. I don't know
Yeah,
quite.
he's saying go forward.
Okay.
He said he didn't realize it
I'm
was in the
trying to
presentation.
understand what we plan to say to the public going forward at the 5 rate hearings. Do we
Got it.
start where
Well-
the customer started, or do we start here?
You mean when we make the
Traditionally,
presentation? Yeah.
Al, traditionally we do a kind of 1-year agency overview at a high level, and then we go into the financing. So it won't be quite the same deck that we've just done, but it will have both kind of the work of the agency and accomplishments over the last fiscal year, and then the rate proposal.
Well, let's see how it goes. I'd like to. I'm looking forward to hearing what you're going to out now.
Okay. All right. Next, Omar. All right. And so our proposal to you all is that the fiscal year 2026 rate should be 3.7% higher than the fiscal 25 rate. And again, this this is the lowest we've had in a couple of years. Of course, there were several years of very low and often zero rate increases that you all approved. But over the last several years, we've been quite aggressive. And that in conjunction with our very aggressive efforts on collections, and I will point out, not only are we more than $260 million ahead of revenue plan right now, we've been better than $200 million ahead of revenue plan for each of the last 3 years. And so that has paid off pretty dramatically. And the good news is that, and I think this is a testament to a lot that DEP has done well, is that we are still much lower in terms of our rate hikes than many of our most comparable utilities across the Northeast and Midwest, or Mid-Atlantic rather. But nonetheless, it is a slightly above consumer inflation increase, because at least the way I understand it, consumer inflation right now is just below 3%. And then the final point I'll make is that 3.7 is actually the 15-year average. So we are somewhat reverting to a mean, but that does. But yeah. And now I will turn it over to the CFO to walk you through the specifics.
So just to build on the point that Rit made earlier, we always do take this look at our peer cities around the country to kind of see how we're tracking against them. So on the graph on the left, which we've shown, I think, often, you can see kind of how New York's water costs compare versus some of those peer cities. Cities with a similar kind of high cost of living, many of them you can see at the top of the chart, Seattle, San Francisco, DC, and so on, do tend to have much higher water rate charges than we do have in New York. So happily, we are, despite our high cost of living, water remains, quite affordable. In New York, compared to other utilities, our rate increase actually is below the rate increase of other utilities here in the city. And as you can see, well below the mean and sort of the price of that in peer cities with similar costs. I think the average of these 30 cities, they're averaging about 5.5% for this year for their rate increases. So we're below that average this year as well. And the right-hand table, I think we've also shown this traditionally each year. It's looking at sort of the annual bill of a sort of quote-unquote normal customer. We base this on the 70,000 gallons per year. And this, you can see in New York City, we have an annual bill that would work out to be about $1,181. Compared to the 30 large city average, we're still tracking around 19-20%, below that average. So that's something that we are happy to see. Next slide. So looking at what this might mean against that sort of notional 70,000 gallons per year for single-family property owners, it would represent an annual increase of about $43 a year. So, a very low, $7, $8 a month kind of increase to the bill. And then the increases for multifamily per residential unit or our MCP program are sort of in the same ballpark, between sort of $35 to $45 per unit per year. So, and then we have had stable and sort of solid set for the minimum charge. So those properties that are using really just the minimum of water, and we're not proposing to increase that this year. We're keeping that flat. That's the 463 number that you can see on the chart there. This looks at the overall budget for next year, the preliminary forecast. So this year, we look at this with 4 or 5 different components. So the first here being our O&M expense budget. The second is debt service, so obviously paying for our capital program. We do keep a significant, small but significant amount of money to be able to do cash financed construction. That's our capital market fund or our PAYGO fund. We have administrative expenses for the water board and the water authority. And then we've also, in the last year had a rental payment as well. So looking this year's budget, we've been tracking to almost $4.6 billion. Next year's is really quite comparable, a little bit higher, particularly on the O&M side, and that's that inflation that we're seeing. I'll talk a little bit about the components of that, but in other areas tracking fairly on par for an overall budget that's a small increase, but not hugely more than this year. Next slide, please. This is just a little bit of a deeper dive into that expense budget because this is one of the areas we are seeing sort of go up somewhat. As Rit mentioned, we are in an inflationary, we have been in a period of inflation since COVID. Obviously, things are a little bit more volatile at the moment in the last few months. And as Rit mentioned, again, the biggest places we see these increases in are both for water supply. You see in the first bucket here, and also second, water quality treatment. So those are obviously the places where we use the most chemicals in our budget, and we are seeing real price pressure on those chemicals over the last few years. So it's not just a this year thing, it's been sort of growing over the last few years.
Sorry to be annoying, one last thing.
Sure.
You don't have to talk about it today, so you can table it and tell us later. Would just like to understand if you guys have done any tariff analysis.
Yes, I can speak to that a little bit, yeah.
Especially on the chemical side,
yeah,
because what I know about the chemical side.
Yeah. So what we did back in February, we reached out and had some initial conversations with sort of our top suppliers to gauge what they thought the impact might be. And they did have sort of a favorable response at that time, saying that they didn't think they would see much impact. But we have started an analysis anyway, just to understand the portfolio better, kind of take those top expenses, look at both where the suppliers are located and where their raw materials are located. We're doing that both on the expense side and on the capital project side, looking at project typologies and kind of looking at, we're now discussing like how deep we go on that, but obviously certain typologies have different uses of different raw materials, like or finished materials, steel and so on, steel, concrete, but also electrical equipment, which is really, even before the tariffs, we saw a real increase in those over the last few years. So we're in that analysis now. We did have our first call last week from a supplier, chemical supplier, who said, we did tell you back in February, we're not impacted, and now we're unexpectedly seeing something different. So we're just starting to work with that supplier now and kind of understand better what's coming.
I mean, it's a moving target day by day, so that's why. We've done about 8 internally, so I understand. But it would just be, as we're talking about capital planning, what those increases are, would be helpful to understand.
And we'll come back in a minute, Arlene, just to talk about the different risks that we're tracking. Obviously, that's one of them, but it's not the only. Not the only one.
And along with that sort of cost analysis, is there a supply risk?
Yeah, supply chain risk as well.
Like something won't be available?
Yeah, we're starting to look at that.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's both elements need to be understood better.
Thank you.
So as well as with chemicals, also things like the biosolids removal, we've also been seeing those costs increase as well, and so that's another one that we're tracking, and we do have a proposal for increased costs this year for that. I mean, I think the last one I would highlight here is cybersecurity and IT investment, because again, that's another one where we're just in a different landscape than we've been the last year or two. Obviously, we've been seeing sort of unprecedented communications from the White House, just the sort of profile of the risk for utilities around the country, particularly water. Rit and I were both at conferences in the last week talking to folks who've literally water sector who've had cyber attacks on their infrastructure, lost, pieces of information or sort of data that they had within their utilities. So we are proposing, new investments in that area, although, of course, we work hand in hand with all of the city's infrastructure, protecting us as a whole with that. The profile of the utility is just is also heightened. So, next slide. And then, Arlene, this gets to the topic that you were asking about earlier. Obviously, we had a period, fiscal 21, 22, where we were seeing an unprecedented sort of profile in the opposite direction, but obviously we've seen kind of the cost of financing rise in the last year or two. have sort of that increased cost across the board. And obviously with the volatility we've been seeing in the last few months, that's an even more difficult sort of profile. And I don't know if you have any specific questions, or if David or Phil, you want to comment at all?
Just for Al's benefit, if you want to move closer to the microphone. Sorry.
Briefly, I don't want to, we can, as Arlene said, we can probably have a deeper dive at another meeting in how we finance. But, the City of New York and PDP and the Water Authority and together, we actually don't have the option of not financing. We finance on a reimbursement basis, so we have to reimburse the general fund, otherwise the general fund comes to a halt. So we do have to go to the market. We were very successful earlier this year in February. We went out with a new money transaction. We had overwhelming investor demand, and we actually upsized it by 50%. For precisely this reason, take advantage of a market opportunity when we have it. The system's flush with capital cash. During the Liberation Day period, the city was successful in issuing about almost $4 billion worth of bonds, tax exempt and taxable. And what we had to do is we had to express a willingness to move with the market. The day we did a general obligation deal, our market indices rose 30 basis points, 25 basis points the next day, 25 basis points the next day. But we had to tell investors, we're going to be going with the market, and we got demand. We got sufficient demand to get transactions done. The Water Authority, we just did a funding transaction, a second piece. We did another piece earlier. So we have been able to generate savings. But we have to be very strategic about how we go in the market, when our windows are, because those are pretty narrow too. We have to enter the market at very specific times because of disclosure. The budget just came out, so we're going to be quiet for a little bit. But so yes, we have to be very strategic about how we enter the market. But we have been successful. Investors are willing to own our paper and buy our paper, and we're excited about that. But yes, it is a higher interest rate environment in both the fixed rate and our variable rate portfolio, where that used to be near zero in the 2021 range. Those rates are now in the 2s, 3s, and 4s, but very volatile, and so it's management.
So given the stability here, how is, I think I saw on the last slide with the budget that our debt service costs are actually lower than they were last year. What's actually happening there?
Yeah, I was noticing that myself in the last round. I have to see if that's the investment.
It's probably a combination of.
It might be the investment.
Because you got to think it's about the bonds
volume
that you issued at the time.
Yeah.
You're servicing them. You're servicing your 2020, 21. You're servicing all those bonds, and for such a long time, we were in an unnatural low rate environment. It was over a decade. So what you're seeing is what you're paying today. You're going to start to see that go up because now you're having your 24, your 25 as you roll forward. But that makes sense given where the interest rate environment has been for such a long time.
Even with a growing capital plan.
Investment earnings, so
And it's also, right, and you also had great earnings in the equity market.
So the headline debt service, the contractual debt service costs, when we go to the budget setting in June, we'll have the detailed walk for everybody to look at. But the headline contractual debt service costs will be higher next year. We show on this slide net debt, so it's the contractual debt plus the roll forward from last year, or minus the roll forward from last year plus this year's roll forward for next year. So we show it on an aggregate net basis. When we go to the budget in June, we'll have the walk, which shows a breakdown of the individual lines. The contractual debt service next year will be higher than this year. It's offset largely by the type changes in the roll forward calculation.
Sorry, Phil, did you want to?
We also, you saw we budgeted for pay-as-you-go capital. Last year, we didn't actually use that. We took that money and did the debt. So some of the, what was outstanding at this time last year by July 1st had been defeated. So we prepaid some of that debt.
Got it. Thank you.
So the other rate that we always bring to the board is obviously the upstate rate for our wholesale customers. So as you remember, these rates are calculated in a completely different methodology because those customers are paying for raw water, so to speak, that's being delivered to them. They don't pay a lot of the costs that we have to pay for in-city, both for the distribution of water, but of course the treatment of wastewater and a lot of the other infrastructure that we have in the city. So this year we're actually proposing, we're seeing a decrease in the rate for the upstate customers. This is primarily driven by two pieces. One is that we had built into the rate the charge for the Delaware Aqueduct shutdown, and not all of those expenses actually had to be paid out because of the postponement, unfortunately, of the work. So that ends up being a credit to those customers in the calculations for this year. In addition, the way that the rate is calculated is the cost divided by the amount of consumption. So if consumption increases, the rate itself actually goes down, although the revenue that we collect is the same. And for the first time last year and this year, we're actually seeing a slightly higher consumption. If for 20 years, the consumption level, both upstate and in city, has, as you know, been decreasing. And in fact, in our rates, we take that into account because there has been that ongoing trend for more than 20 years. In the last 2 years, we have seen a slight uptick, both upstate and in city. And so that has this unusual result of actually ending up in a negative rate increase.
And is that
a
total, or like, are you seeing a population growth? Is it per capita increase, a mix of both, just to get a sense of what that profile?
Great question. I'm not sure.
Look, as you know, we don't have the kind of granular data on population that we would like. I think we're at about a 0.6%, so we're at about 100.6% of last year's consumption to date. Which again, usually over the last many years, we've been more at the minus 0.7. So it's a significant swing. Exactly what it is, recent census data did suggest that over the last 2 years, New York City's population really has rebounded. We do have a lot of asylum seekers still, and they do use water. But we don't have the granular data, haven't done the granular analysis to be able to understand where is this mainly taking place.
I'd be curious, as I know upstate, where I have a house just outside the watershed, the newspapers there are dominated by water concerns over population increases in buildings. So just curious, as those two relate, where we're seeing that, and if we're seeing that just population boom or bigger individual use as well.
I can ask Ed if we have.
We also did, though, part of the driver was during the height of the drought, we had a significant increase in the number of hydrants that people had opened. And, people don't appreciate that a hydrant can release 1 million gallons a day. And there was one day in August where we had more than 100 hydrants that BWSO had to go around and close. And so hot weather will drive higher consumption, which, is it going to drive it by 5 or 10%? No, but when you're talking about a 0.5% change, it's possible that plays a role.
So just to summarize, the what's highlighted in green and the decrease of minus 1.6 is the entitlement rate. And just to note again that we do have an excess rate if upstate communities use more than the entitlement, and so that has traditionally and again this year been set at it's proposed to be set at the same rate as in-city costs. So the 3.7% would be on that excess water usage if there is any. Next slide. So to Arlene's point about sort of all the different pieces that are happening, we wanted just to mention, kind of highlight the different types of risks that we are tracking at the moment. We've talked about sort of inflation over the last few years, but obviously because of tariffs and other reasons, we're continuing to see that, and in fact could see some jumps or changes that would have been perhaps not anticipated, last year. We've talked as well about the bond market sort of experiencing that kind of volatility. We haven't talked, but we've mentioned in past meetings, I'll go into it on the next slide, some of the risks around tax-exempt municipal bond financing changing. So I'll come back to that in just a moment. We are, of course, and we've talked about this a little bit with the lead service lines, closely tracking guidance or changes in potential federal funding reductions. So we are happily, I would say, sort of in a less risk, we have a less risky profile than some of our sister agencies like DOT, who has really very significant amounts of federal funding, or the city as a whole. So as the water utility, I'm happy to say, our exposure is less, but of course, on a case-by-case basis, we're watching all of the grants that we have either proposed, have underway, or had sort of envisioned. So the most significant one at the moment is the BRIC funding. So we've had some of that funding is sort of on design projects for our Cloudburst project is underway and has been repaid, but then we were hoping and had proposed to use that BRIC funding for the construction of those projects. Happily, the first 4 projects, we do have the money for them in our budget, so we will not have to necessarily push off those first 4. This would have been a replenishment of those projects that would have let us do the next project. So we don't have a hole in our budget from those, but it means that it will be slower for us potentially to start new projects of that nature.
The net is that New Yorkers will be less protected from climate change because of the proposed elimination of BRIC. There's just no way around it.
Yeah.
Right? But it doesn't propose. It's particularly different for us versus some of the agencies that rely on operating funding. Right? This is capital projects we just won't do, or we will do later, as opposed to
actual operations. Yeah.
Right.
Is there anything else you want to say?
Yeah, before we switch to the next slide, I just want to point out the other thing, and this gets to, I think, some of the questions that you all were talking about in terms of supply chain. I think we all appreciate the fact that the world is a much less stable place now than it was even a year ago, and it was already a much less stable place than it had been. Among the things that I am increasingly thinking about and we've started talking about internally are, number one, that the federal government has been very clear that they're just not going to be doing the jobs that they used to do. And a lot of what we have often relied on the federal government for is security, that kind of early awareness of threats. We work very closely with Homeland Security and the FBI and CISA, the counterintelligence or cyber, what does this stand for? Anyway, somebody can remind me. But basically the federal equivalent of the New York Cyber Command. And at least at the moment, it does seem like what those agencies do for municipalities in terms of assistance and threat assessment is among the things that the federal government is planning on doing less of. As Narissa said, while, knock on wood, we're not aware of it, there are major peers of ours that have had experiences with the Chinese Volt Typhoon virus, and some of the others of other origins. And as the geopolitical world, let's face it, China has set a deadline for when they want to be able to invade Taiwan. There is a potential that some sort of attack on a water system in the U.S. might be part of a strategy to distract or upset the United States during a moment when it might need to reply to something. And all of our supply chain issues, I think I've certainly begun thinking about the extent to which, while we have relied on suppliers, I mean, we are a space-constrained agency, like everybody in New York City. We don't keep a lot of stuff on hand. We don't have a lot of storage space for the stuff we need to export.
Yep.
And I think that is among the things that we probably need to start thinking about differently as an agency, because we just cannot assume that the supply chain is going to be both as functional as it has been, and we cannot assume that there are not people who will be trying to intentionally slow down our supply chain one way or another. So these are things that not, this week or next week, although in fact we started one exercise on this last week, but something that I think the agency needs to be focused on to protect New Yorkers.
Well, and it doesn't have to, having worked in cities that have faced cyber attacks, not from national or international countries, but just for ransom and utilities having that, it takes years to recover. I think not to underestimate, it sounds like you guys are not, the damage that it can do to unwind that, even if you're able to get things back. So spending the time in that where we're reliant on the billing system, and we've seen how much better it is when the billing system is proactively working, take that away from us, that is a huge challenge. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say thank you. It's just not easy. We have this, when I'm asked about sort of what's my financial outlook, I say the market builds in instability. It doesn't build in unpredictability. So as someone who has to manage external constituents as well as manage our internal investment, it is not an easy job to sort of plan for not knowing what tomorrow brings. So just want to say thank you. And I think this is like one of the areas where people really do need to give you guys a lot of credit, because you wake up and you're like, oh shit, right? It's like, and there's no other way to describe it, right? The markets have been unusually just like not in line with market tradition, or like just not operating functionally. And that's a ton of markets, which makes your job impossible, right? So just, I think as someone who procures external dollars and manages external investors, I understand how hard that is to not be able to plan go forward.
Well, and all of that is small compared to the next slide.
Great segue to the next slide. So I mentioned on the last slide just the risk of the tax exemption status of municipal bonds. So this is something that is a national issue. This would impact, obviously, not just us. It would impact every city across the country. And it would impact the city of New York as well, obviously not just the water and wastewater system, but we have undertaken some sort of proactive modeling with the modeling teams just to take a look at what would happen if this were to disappear or be significantly changed. And it would end up hitting us at a rate increase of about 1% across the board each year in the coming years, depending on what it looked like. So I mean, that would be, this would be sort of an unprecedented change in terms of modern, sort of the last, decades and decades of sort of structures for investments on a municipal level. We're watching this closely. David and Phil are actively involved with all of the different sort of advocacy groups, kind of understanding what's happening. But it's not impossible that this change might happen, and we may know about it in the next few months.
Well, and look, I mean, I don't think we can, the famous Supreme Court case that determined the power to tax is the power to destroy. And what we see potentially here is the casual destruction of the entire infrastructure of municipal infrastructure in pursuit of Congress meeting some targets that it has set for itself. And I think this is the kind of thing, again, in the theme of overall instability, like if there were a year in which a mid-year rate hike were to become necessary, this is the upcoming year, right?
This is it.
And one of the things we've also seen is that it's really important for people to understand the consequences of what seem to be cheap decisions.
Yep.
And something like this, to my mind, rises to that level.
Yep.
Right.
And the more we can put it into the 10% over a decade and the actual, what does that mean for kind of multifamily buildings and others, it doesn't seem like a lot, but this is huge. I want to make sure that we are.
Because we're talking
stressing it.
10%, we're talking 1% on $1 billion. Like, that is a significant number,
Yeah.
right? So,
Well, and just as one smaller piece of a larger city
Yeah.
financing.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
This is
210
not just a
billion.
DEP issue, this is
Right.
a
DOT,
city and
everyone.
cities and everyone who takes advantage of it.
But
Yeah.
all New Yorkers will.
City and
be
state.
paying The
Yeah.
extra tab for
Yeah.
$210 billion,
yeah,
Exactly.
and that'll hit them in multiple ways.
Exactly. Yeah.
Presumably, we're making our elected officials and our congressional
Oh, yeah.
delegation aware of
Yes.
these impacts.
I just want y'all to know I've disassociated what's happening in the world. You guys really brought me down today. Dad, you owe me a donut.
Oh my gosh. It's almost 10, so.
No longer attacking them.
Yeah.
No.
Sorry, we're keeping you guys late.
It's all, no, I'm worried about your
Yeah.
time because we're almost at 10 o'clock. So
That's fine.
just to bring Arlene a little bit up, we'll end on the more positive note. So, as Rip mentioned, one of the reasons that we're able to bring the rate down a little bit this year is that we're having sort of a historic, revenue collection year. We've talked about this number already, but as of today, we're over $260 million above plan. It's one of the best cash collection years we've had on record. Rich talked about some of the great work that Albert and his team are leading in conjunction often with BWSO in terms of service termination. So we kind of keep a tab on how best we can try and understand the impact of the different pieces in the portfolio we've been doing over the last few years. We had amnesty a couple of years ago. We've had a lot of service terminations over this last calendar year. So we estimate about $18 million worth of payments collected from that, with another $21 million of payment agreements entered into payment agreements. We also have had this legal referral program where we work with a third-party law firm to address particularly tricky sort of collections. And we've collected about $4 million through that program so far. And then, of course, the lien sale that was authorized last year for this year. Right now, the lien sale itself comes on May 20th. So we've had 6 months of communications with folks about this very actively. Albert and his team are out in community meetings all the time, talking to people, helping them understand how to come in good standing, or, sort of there are ways to kind of get yourself out of it as well if in certain circumstances. But we anticipate that this has helps us to collect about $130 million over the last number of months because of that program. We talked a little bit about resolving these disputes we've had with the larger debtors. So as I mentioned before, we've had really great actually collaboration from MTA and Port Authority in particular, working through the metering now that we're almost finished with that, having good faith payments for them along the way. So that's been really great, and really appreciative of that this year. And then we've talked, Albert's come and presented a couple times on the multifamily conservation program. We are looking to start enforcing that from next year. We're going to be making some changes to that, which we'll bring to you later. We are renewing that in the time being so that we can have that first year of sort of communications and enforcement before we make actual changes to the program. So that's sort of the proposal for this year. Next slide, please. One thing I wanted to really highlight is what we haven't been able to bring to you before was we do have a really large amount of outstanding accounts receivable. It's not a great number. It's not something we're happy with, and we're really working on it. What we have seen is that the total number of delinquent accounts has really stabilized. So as you know, we've talked about this multiple times. We peaked during COVID. We brought it down during amnesty. And the last year, we've really seen that be stable, which is great news. What's new that we brought to you today was really talking about looking at how lien sale has slowed the growth in accounts receivable. So, you can see in the left-hand column, we sort of peaked at the end of 2024 at $1.2 billion worth in AR. We're now seeing that slowly starting to come down year on year, particularly with these last three. The last 3 rows are month by month of the last 3 months as we've led up to lien sale. So lien sale is working to help us slow that growth for this year. And the other numbers I want to highlight are really that 23% over on the right-hand end. We have increased the amount of AR that we have in a payment agreement incredibly over the last 3 years. So back in end of 2022, we only had 9% of our AR in payment agreements. Now we have almost 25% of that AR. The AR is too high, but at least almost a quarter of it we have in payment agreements with people doing that slow pay down over a period of time. As you know, we give quite a lot of flexibility for folks. Some people do struggle, so they're able to enter into quite long-term payment agreements to pay back, but we chip away at it. And so what we're really proud of is that big increase in the number of folks who are in payment agreements with us, despite the AR being high.
Yeah, and again, can I just point out, I think the column of 180-day AR less payment agreements,
yes,
the fact that we have actually begun to bend the curve is the achievement, frankly, that I've been waiting for and we've been waiting for. And while the AR has merely plateaued and is still higher than it is year over year, the fact that most of that work, just as a policy decision, right? If somebody is willing to enter into a payment agreement, we will give them one for very little down.
Yeah.
Right. And so if we think about a payment agreement that is being serviced as being an account in good standing, which at that point one should, I'd argue, right? I think it's really important that we begin to see a light at the end of the tunnel.
Mm-hmm. To get a payment agreement, do you have to enroll in autopay?
No.
So are people paying
Yeah.
on the payment agreements?
Yes, but the short answer is yes, but we also, based on discussions with other utilities who have seen this same trend, we understand that keeping customers in good standing and working with them and tracking that is going to be the next challenge, but one they're focused on. What does happen is customers get moved to monthly billing, and then they get the installment plan and the new charges and the interest all in one package to make the sort of payments simpler.
Got it. Thank you.
And then the next slide, I'm particularly excited to be able to share with you, which is that we've had the HWAP, Home Water Assistance Program for single-family homes, and the MWAP, Multifamily Water Assistance Program, for a number of years. What we did when we sort of took a hard look at how much we were paying out, we found that we've kind of plateaued with the number of folks who are automatically enrolled in the HWAP program, and we've been paying out credits to all of those folks. It's about 96,000, over 96,000 people who are pre-qualified for this through data we received from sister agencies. But we found that we actually had money that we weren't paying out, even though we were earmarking it for this program. Oppositely, with the MWAP program, we've been oversubscribed, where we have more people applying to try and get the credits through this program than we've been able to service. So what we've been able to do is rebalance the funding on these two programs. So we're anticipating this year we'll be able to both expand the credit that we give to the folks under the HWAP program up to $159 a year, but also we have a goal to extend the coverage for MWAP to 65,000 apartments, so 20,000 more units being covered by the $250 credit than we've been able to do in the past. So that's really exciting. It's not costing us more, but we're able to give out more and make sure that everything we're sort of earmarking for it is fully utilized. So we'll be able to kind of update you on that, but really, really happy that we've been able to look at the data and see that we can make a change that will make a difference for a lot more folks. And the other two programs will be continuing as we have over the last few years. There's also another a whole set of administrative policy amendments that we're doing to also try and help make work with us more easy, more flexible, and more cost-effective for customers. And I'll ask Albert to talk to this because he's been leading this with our partners in the law department and our legal folks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Narissa. So, I think this is really important because, Arlene, as you talked about, the importance of the meters being and the meter reading devices being in good standing. That's a key component that Narissa and Britt talked about. Then there's the cash collection side, and as Britt was talking about, having lien sale back, aggressive but also fair enforcement is key. And to me, this is focused on that third key component, which is providing excellent customer service to our customers. We're not perfect. We're continuing to evolve, and I think these are really important steps in the right direction. So when we say you have to do plumbing work on your own to make your meter situation right, and then we say, oh, you have a reimbursement schedule that was last updated in 2010, that's an area where we can improve our customer service. So we're going to increase those reimbursement rates. We're also going to make the leak forgiveness and meter bill cap program rules a little bit more flexible, mainly to accommodate situations both involving timing, but also when if we were providing, say, prolonged estimated reads that made it more challenging for a homeowner to identify that leak, it's always the customer's responsibility to manage their property. But we also know that, as Rich says, in this day and age, we're a victim of our own success. Sending these leak notifications, folks tend to rely on that. And so when there was that gap, to be able to still allow folks to come in and have a little bit more time, we think is the right thing to do. The medical exemptions from service terminations, just making that process more straightforward, is pretty cut and dry. The other one, this one is pretty big, which is that, we're revamping what used to be called the theft of service regulation, and a big shout out to Rich Costa on our legal team and Michael Moore, who have been tremendous, as well as others on this, to really refocus on compliance. So that's where if a customer might have a plumbing configuration, it might have been the last homeowner, the plumber might not have done something the right way, where there is the ability for them to essentially have billing interference to interfere with our ability to bill correctly, but it wasn't malicious. And the old regulations sort of forced our hand to immediately move a customer to a essentially penalty rate. This is now going to introduce a new 30-day warning period to again, focus on compliance. You might not have been aware, now you are aware. Make the situation right within 30 days, we're good going forward. Rather than taking customers who were paying well, were in good standing, and now we're essentially converting them into non-payers, driving up our accounts receivable. So we think that this is something that's really going to help. And last but not least, as we're doing this large ramp up of hundreds of thousands of meter reading devices and meters, we're going to need access to properties. So that's why we're increasing the denial of access fee, which is a one-time charge, to $500, which might sound more punitive, but we're actually, again, back to solving for compliance, now making it fully refundable. All we want is access. If we get access to the property, then that fee goes away. We're also going to change how we're doing the noticing. We're going to introduce a way where it's not just paper mail. We're also going to send emails to customers. Maybe you got folks who are just managing their portfolio, the second home, they didn't see the letter, their tenant didn't tell them. Again, trying to take these sort of more customer service friendly pieces, which we think, the full meter to cash process, having that focus on customer service is really going to, not just the right thing to do for New Yorkers, but it's going to benefit our long-term revenue growth as well.
And this is hard, and I think we need to give a lot of credit to Albert and Narissa for focusing on this issue of customer service and making sure that all of our charges, customer interactions, and the use of where we have the ability to punish people for non-compliance is being used in the right way towards the right goal, which is never about revenue maximization, actually, because it's all about fairness, right? We want every New Yorker to get what they deserve, but to pay what they ought to, right? And we want to be able to run the water system in the right way that encourages efficiency and thoughtful usage on the part of the customer. And so while these are things that we can do only with the changes that you need to approve, there are a number of other process changes and policy changes that Albert and Narissa have already implemented, helping exempt entities like schools and others that have the right to free water. In the past, frankly, DEP has been a stickler and put a lot of paperwork responsibility on organizations that aren't always so well run that they're on top of all of their paperwork. We're rethinking that because it doesn't help us to be stingy. What helps us is to serve the public. So in any case, this is I want to thank Albert and Narissa for the work they've done on this.
So last but not least is just the schedule for the hearings through the 5 boroughs. As always, we have a hearing in each borough. Again, this is after the statutory period of notice from today's meeting. So they're May 27th through June the 3rd, with our vote then on Friday, June the 6th, when we come back together here at the next board meeting.
Narissa, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yep.
yes.
Thank you very much, Marissa. Thank you very much, Rit. You all covered a lot of ground. We'll see how it goes from one public hearing to the next. Is there any other business to come before the board this morning?
No, this was the primary piece for today.
I got it. I think I knew the answer.
Yeah.
Assuming there is not, may I have a moving to adjourn the meeting?
Arlene, so moved.
I'll second.
Thank you, Eileen. Who was second?
Adam?
Thank you, Adam. All in favor? In fact, aye. Aye.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Are there
Unanimous.
Unanimous.
Okay, then the meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a good
Thank
morning,
you, Al.
everyone.
Thank you.